The gentle chime of crystal glasses, low laughter of inherited wealth, and the distant harmony of a live string quartet floated through the grand Marivel estate, a vineyard retreat nestled in the rolling hills of Napa Valley. The late afternoon sun spilled molten gold across silk-covered tables and champagne flutes, bathing everything in a glow that felt almost unreal. It was the sort of wedding you'd see in high-end lifestyle magazines, the kind where every imported orchid and monogrammed napkin screamed elegance, and Sylvester Calloway despised every second of it, standing near the bar, his posture perfect and his tuxedo immaculate. He looked like he belonged here, the sharp jawline, the sleek Rolex flashing beneath the fairy lights, the quiet air of someone who owned more than he showed. Billionaire, innovator, reluctant heartthrob. Guests whispered about him as he passed. That's Sylvester Calloway, the tech genius. Still single, can you believe it? But Sylvester barely heard them that he hadn't come to socialize. He was here because Daniel Pierce, his closest friend since prep school, had begged him to attend his sister's wedding. Just show up, drink something classy, and try not to look like you're plotting a hostile takeover, Daniel had joked. Sylvester had agreed. Reluctantly, scowling had become second nature lately. Life, to him, had turned into a polished checklist of acquisitions and applause. Success was loud. Loneliness was silent. He swirled the bourbon in his glass, his reflection rippling faintly on the surface, and scanned the room full of perfect smiles and diamond laughter. Then he saw her. She wasn't flaunting couture or angling for attention. She stood near a cluster of hydrangeas with an older woman, laughing softly, a laugh so natural it cut through the rehearsed glamour around her. Her skin was a rich bronze that glowed beneath the evening light, and her dress, a flowing sapphire blue, hugged her gently, as if it belonged to her alone. Her hair was a wild crown of curls pinned loosely, one escaping to trace her cheek. Sylvester couldn't look away. Who was she? She didn't seem to fit into this world of polished perfection, and yet, somehow, she belonged more than anyone else. There was a quiet authenticity about her, something unpolished and breathtaking. For the first time in a long while, Sylvester felt something shift inside him, something that had been locked behind glass offices and high-rise solitude. If sensing his gaze, she turned. Their eyes met in that moment, fleeting yet electric. The chatter, the music, the shimmering vineyard all seemed to vanish. He saw her, really saw her, and in her eyes, he glimpsed a reflection of himself, not the mogul the world celebrated, but the man he'd forgotten that he didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But one thing hit him with sharp, startling clarity. She was about to change everything. Sylvester Calloway stepped out of the sleek Blacktown car, the California sun glinting off his cufflinks. The vineyard estate shimmered under rows of fairy lights and blooming roses, every detail radiating luxury and precision. If perfection had a scent, it was the blend of jasmine, oak, and expensive champagne that lingered in the air as he adjusted his tie and scanned the scene. Guests in tailored suits and pastel gowns mingled beneath archways draped with white roses. The ceremony lawn overlooked the endless green of Marivel's vineyards, romantic, picturesque, almost too curated to be real. Sylvester exhaled softly. This wasn't his world anymore, not really. But Daniel Pierce had been his brother in all but blood since their college days at Stanford, and Daniel's little sister deserved his presence. He wasn't about to let his friend down. A voice called from behind him. Look who actually showed up. Daniel clapped him on the shoulder with a grin. Sylvester smirked. Wouldn't miss it. Besides, someone had to make sure you didn't sneak away before the vows. Daniel chuckled. Trust me, my fiancée would hunt me down if I did. But I'm glad you're here, man. As Daniel turned to greet another guest, Sylvester's gaze drifted back toward the ceremony lawn and froze. There she was again. She stood near the rows of white chairs, talking with an older woman whose smile mirrored her own. Today, she wore a simple emerald green dress that moved with her like liquid light. Her curls were pinned to one side, catching glints of gold as she laughed. The sight sent an unfamiliar twist through Sylvester's chest, something between curiosity and ache. Daniel followed his gaze and raised an eyebrow. You've noticed Maya Brooks. Maya, Sylvester repeated, his voice low. Yeah, Daniel said with a grin. She's my cousin-in-law's best friend, an interior designer from Chicago. She helped plan half this wedding. What? Sylvester didn't answer. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes said plenty. When the ceremony began, Sylvester was ushered to his seat near the front. And, to his quiet satisfaction, Maya sat only 2 rows ahead. As vows were exchanged and the string quartet swelled behind them, he found himself watching her instead of the couple. The way her eyes shimmered with emotion when the bride spoke. The gentle smile she wore as tears gathered at the corners of her lashes. It wasn't her beauty that struck him most. It was her honesty. In a sea of perfectly posed people, Maya was unapologetically real. When the ceremony ended and guests drifted toward the garden for the reception, fate, or perhaps Daniel's subtle matchmaking, placed Sylvester directly across from her at the dinner table. He cleared his throat lightly. Sylvester Calloway. She looked up, momentarily startled, then smiled. Maya Brooks. I hear you the reason the Wi-Fi here actually works. He laughed, a sound so unguarded it startled even him. That's a first. Usually I'm accused of causing problems, not fixing them. Then tonight's a lucky night, she teased, swirling the drink in her glass. He leaned forward slightly. I also heard you designed part of this venue. It's incredible. She shrugged modestly. I just helped make sure the tent didn't collapse and the flowers didn't fight the lighting. Credit goes to Elise, the bride, for the vision. Still impressive, he said, eyes warm. There was a brief, comfortable silence, the kind that hums softly with possibility. I've seen you in magazines, Maya admitted. You're the founder of Callaway Innovations, right? Guilty, he replied, smiling. But I promise I'm much less intimidating in person. She raised a brow. Debatable. You've got that whole billionaire mystique thing going on. Very James Bond. Sylvester chuckled. Do I at least get points for not talking about mergers in the first 5 minutes? Major points, she said with a grin. Though now I'm wondering how long before you do. They both laughed. Conversation flowed easily, not about wealth or success, but about childhood summers, favorite bands, embarrassing wedding stories. With each story, Sylvester felt his walls ease down. By dessert, he realized how rare this was. Someone who wasn't impressed by his name, but intrigued by his mind. As the string lights flickered above the dance floor, the band shifted to a slow R&B tune. Sylvester hesitated, then stood and offered his hand. Dance with me? Maya tilted her head. You dance. Not well, he confessed, a half-smile tugging at his lips. But for you, I'll risk public humiliation. Her laugh was soft and genuine. That's the most honest line I've heard all night. She slipped her hand into his, and they moved to the rhythm, slow, close, unhurried. The world around them blurred into muted color. Maya's head rested gently against his chest, and Sylvester's breath matched the tempo of the music. You surprise me, she murmured. How so? I expected you to be colder. Like your reputation. He smiled faintly. Sometimes reputations lie. She looked up. And sometimes people do. Their eyes met, and the air between them grew taut with something neither could define. It was just a dance, but also a beginning neither of them had planned. When the song ended, he leaned down slightly. I hope this isn't our last conversation. She smiled. Depends. Are you always this charming, or just at weddings? He chuckled. Let's find out. They parted only when the party began to fade. But their eyes found each other again and again, a quiet promise echoing through the night. Back in his suite, standing before the wide balcony doors, Sylvester loosened his tie and stared out at the stars. Something had shifted. He didn't yet know what it was, or where it might lead, but one thing was clear. Maya Brooks had just stepped into his meticulously structured world, and nothing would ever be the same. The morning after the wedding arrived soft and silver, the kind of dawn that stretched gently across the vineyards like a sigh. Mist clung to the vines, and the faint scent of rain lingered in the air. Though the skies had remained clear all night, Sylvester Calloway hadn't slept much. He stood by the window of his villa suite, shirt sleeves rolled up, coffee in hand, watching the light break over the valley. The night before replayed in fragments, the laughter, the music, Maya's eyes catching his across the table, her voice lingering in his mind long after the last song faded. He'd spent years attending events that blurred together, board meetings, galas, auctions. But that wedding, somehow, had been different. She had been different. That he smiled faintly. Maya Brooks, he murmured to himself. Even her name had a rhythm that refused to leave him alone. after breakfast, needing air and perhaps a distraction. Sylvester took the narrow path that curved around the vineyard toward the small lake that shimmered at the edge of the property. The stillness of the place calmed him. Rows of grapevines framed the dirt trail like quiet guardians, and the distant hum of bees mingled with birdsong. As he reached the lake, he stopped short. There, sitting cross-legged on a wooden bench near the water, was Maya, sketchbook balanced on her knees, a pencil moving lazily across the page. The breeze lifted a strand of her hair, and she tucked it back absently, completely absorbed in her work. For a moment, Sylvester simply watched her. She looked at peace, like someone who didn't need the world's approval to feel alive. Then, summoning a bit of courage, he cleared his throat lightly. I'm starting to think this vineyard isn't big enough to hide in. Maya looked up, startled at first, then smiled when she recognized him. Good morning, Mr. Calloway. Didn't expect to see you up this early. Most guests are still nursing hangovers. He smirked. I like quiet mornings. Helps me remember I'm human. She chuckled, closing her sketchbook. And what do billionaires usually do when they remember they're human? Apparently, he said, stepping closer. They walk around hoping to run into interior designers by a lake. Her eyes glimmered with amusement. That's oddly specific. Maybe I'm oddly specific. She gestured to the bench beside her. Care to sit? Oddly specific, man? He did. The bench creaked softly beneath his weight, the air between them easy, unforced. After a few moments, he nodded toward her sketchbook. Mind if I see? She hesitated, then handed it over. Inside were delicate pencil sketches, scenes from the wedding. The floral arches, the table settings, the vineyard bathed in sunset. But one drawing caught his attention. A man standing alone near the bar, head tilted slightly, drink in hand. That's... He looked up, surprised. Me? Maya laughed. Caught you brooding before the ceremony. Don't worry, I didn't sell it to the tabloids. He smiled, though something in her sketch moved him, the quiet way she'd seen through his mask. The drawing wasn't just an image. It was a mirror of who he'd been in that moment, alone in a crowd, lost in thought. You see too much, he said softly. Occupational hazard, she replied, smiling. Design teaches you to notice things most people overlook. He nodded, still studying her lines. You notice what people hide. Their eyes met, and silence stretched between them, not awkward, but rich with understanding. After a while, she broke it gently. So what brings you to Napa Valley, Sylvester? Other than your friend's wedding and the accidental sketching incident. He leaned back slightly, watching the ripples dance on the lake's surface. Honestly, I'm not sure. I think I just needed a break, from boardrooms, from headlines, from expectation. Maya tilted her head. Expectation can be heavy. He nodded. Heavier than most people think. Sometimes it feels like success comes with its own kind of loneliness. She smiled faintly. Maybe that's why people like us find comfort in quiet places like this. People like us. The ones who feel too much and say too little, she said simply. Sylvester turned to look at her then. Really look. There was no artifice in her words, no flattery. Just truth. It had been a long time since anyone spoke to him that way. They sat together until the sun rose fully over the lake, casting soft gold across the water. Conversation drifted from art to travel to favorite books. Easy, flowing, natural. When Maya finally stood to leave, she glanced over her shoulder. I'm heading back to Chicago tomorrow morning. I have a few client meetings waiting. Something in his chest tightened. That's soon. She nodded. Duty calls. He hesitated before saying, would it be strange if I said I wish you were staying longer? Her lips curved into a small smile. Only a little strange. But I'll take it as a compliment. She started down the path, sketchbook tucked under her arm, but paused. You should visit Chicago sometime, Sylvester. The architecture alone might inspire even a tech genius. He smiled. I just might. When she disappeared into the distance, the world seemed quieter, too quiet. Sylvester looked out over the still lake and exhaled slowly. Something about that morning had left an imprint he couldn't explain. For the first time in years, he didn't feel the urge to check his phone, open his laptop, or plan his next move. He just sat there, watching the ripples fade, thinking of her voice, her laughter, the way she saw straight through him, and for the first time in a long while, Sylvester Calloway wondered what it would be like to stop chasing success and start chasing something real. Back in San Francisco, the skyline glittered like ambition carved into glass. From the corner office of Callaway Innovations, the city stretched endlessly beneath Sylvester's gaze. The bridges, the lights, the restless pulse of commerce that never truly slept. He should have felt at home here. This was his empire. But he didn't. The days that followed his return from Napa Valley blurred into a monotony of meetings, investor calls, and data presentations. The same cycle of success that had once driven him now felt hollow. His assistants noticed he was quieter than usual. His colleagues assumed he was preoccupied with another acquisition. Only Sylvester knew the truth that he was distracted by a pair of brown eyes, a laugh like soft rain, and a sketchbook filled with truth. He'd thought of her, Maya Brooks, more often than he cared to admit. Her voice echoed in the back of his mind during board meetings, her words replayed when he stood by the window at night. She had left after the wedding, as she said she would, returning to Chicago and her world of design. But something in him felt unfinished, like a conversation cut short one evening. As the city lights flickered to life below, Sylvester sat alone in his office. The building was quiet. Most of his team had gone home. He loosened his tie, leaned back in his chair, and stared at the ceiling, the hum of the air conditioner his only company. His phone buzzed at first, he ignored it. But when he glanced at the screen, his heart paused. Unknown number. "You still owe me a tour of your quiet mornings, Mr. Callaway." For a moment, he just stared, then smiled, slow and genuine. Maya typed back, "I thought you were too busy conquering Chicago." Her reply came quickly. "Even conquerors need coffee breaks." He laughed softly, the sound breaking through his solitude. Their texts flowed easily from there. Teasing, thoughtful, honest. She told him about her latest interior project, a downtown cafe that mixed vintage furniture with modern glasswork. He told her about his latest software launch and how little excitement it actually brought him. Over the next few weeks, their messages became a quiet rhythm in his life. Morning greetings, late-night thoughts, small glimpses into each other's worlds. Then one evening, after a particularly grueling investor dinner, he found himself typing without thinking. "I'll be in Chicago next week." "Business trip." Her response came after a pause. "Business, huh?" He hesitated. "Mostly. Then maybe I'll let you buy me coffee, just to make sure your mornings live up to the hype." He grinned at the screen. "It's a deal." A week later, Sylvester Callaway arrived in Chicago under a slate-gray sky. The city's energy was different from California's, sharper, more grounded, alive with movement and grit. As his car wove through the downtown streets, he glanced at the skyline, a mix of history and steel, art and ambition. It reminded him of her somehow. They met at a quiet cafe tucked between old brick buildings. Maya was already there, seated near the window, a steaming mug between her hands. When she looked up and saw him, her smile warmed the whole room. San Francisco's favorite billionaire actually showed up, she teased as he approached. "Wouldn't miss it," he said, taking the seat across from her. She eyed him playfully. "So, is this really business, or did you fly all this way for the world's best cappuccino?" He smiled. "Let's just say I was curious to see if Chicago looks different when you're in it." She shook her head, amused. "You're dangerous with words, you know that?" "Only when I mean them." Her laughter softened into silence, and for a moment, the noise of the cafe faded. The air between them held the same quiet charge. It had that night under the vineyard lights, familiar, magnetic, and unspoken. They spent hours talking about the differences between their worlds, about design and technology, about life's quiet spaces. She told him how she loved creating warmth out of empty rooms. He confessed how his company, though vast, often left him feeling like a visitor in his own success. As the afternoon sun slanted through the windows, she leaned back, studying him. "You know, you're not what I expected." "Oh, what did you expect?" She smiled. "A man made of marble and headlines." "But you're softer than you look." He raised an eyebrow. "Should I take that as a compliment?" "Absolutely," she said. "Marble doesn't feel. People do." Something in those words landed deep. When they finally parted ways outside the cafe, the wind sweeping through the streets, Sylvester felt that rare, startling sensation again, the one he couldn't name. She'd stepped into his world once by accident. Now she'd invited him into hers, and it felt dangerously natural. As he watched her walk away, Maya turned back and called out, "Next time." I picked the coffee spot. He smiled, hands in his pockets. I'll hold you to it. The city lights flickered to life behind her, and for the first time in years, Sylvester didn't rush to his next meeting. He just stood there, letting the moment breathe, letting it change him. Something real was beginning to take shape. And deep down, he knew. He didn't want to let it slip away. The week in Chicago stretched longer than planned. What began as a short business trip became a quiet detour into something more personal, though Sylvester never admitted it aloud. His team back in San Francisco assumed he was negotiating a contract extension. Only he knew the truth. He was learning the rhythm of Maya Brooks City, and, in some unguarded way, her rhythm too. Their coffee meetings turned into long walks through Millennium Park, where they laughed about the oddest things, tourists posing by the Cloud Gate, or Sylvester's complete inability to eat a deep dish pizza without making a mess. Evenings drifted into art galleries and dimly lit wine bars, the kind that played soft jazz beneath the hum of conversation. It was simple, unplanned, and quietly addictive. One evening, as they stood overlooking the lakefront, the city lights scattered across the dark water like spilled stars. The wind brushed against them, carrying the scent of rain and the faint echo of traffic. Maya crossed her arms against the chill. "You know," she said softly, "you're not what I expected from a man who owns half of Silicon Valley." He smiled faintly. "You keep saying that. What did you expect?" "Someone colder," she admitted. "Sharper. More untouchable." "Maybe I was," he said, gazing out at the lake. "Until recently." She turned to study him. "What changed?" He looked at her, eyes steady. "You." The words slipped out before he could soften them. Maya's breath caught, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind played with her curls, and she tucked one behind her ear, her eyes never leaving his. Then she smiled, slow, almost shy. "Careful, Sylvester. I might start believing you. Then I'll have to keep proving it," he murmured. They fell silent again. But it was the kind of silence that hummed, alive, delicate, and full of everything neither dared to say. The following days brought them closer still. Maya introduced him to the local markets where she sourced fabrics for her interior designs. Small shops tucked in narrow alleys with colorful displays of handmade art. Sylvester, in turn, showed her his world, the side beyond money and boardrooms. One afternoon, she found him in a quiet cafe corner, typing furiously on his laptop. "Work emergency?" She teased. That he shook his head. "Just an idea. Something I want to build." "For your company?" "No," he said, closing the laptop. "For myself." Maya tilted her head. "You build billion-dollar systems, and now you want to make something personal." He nodded slowly. "I've spent years creating technology that connects people globally. But lately, I've realized I don't even know how to connect. Personally." Her expression softened. "You're doing better than you think." "Am I?" he asked quietly. She reached across the table and brushed her fingers lightly against his. "You're here, aren't you?" The touch was brief, but enough to stir something deep in him. For a moment, the cafe disappeared. There was only her hand, warm and grounding, and the pulse of something real between them. That he wanted to say more. To tell her how she'd become the most unexpected part of his life. How she'd redefined what peace felt like. But the words caught in his throat. Instead, he said softly, "You make quiet feel like home." She smiled. "Then stay a little longer." And he did. But as the week drew to an end, reality crept back in. A string of urgent emails from his executive board began to flood in. Investors were anxious. Product launches were pending. The empire he'd built didn't pause just because he wanted it to. On his final evening in Chicago, Sylvester stood outside Maya's apartment building, hands deep in his coat pockets. She leaned against the doorway, sketchbook in hand. "So," she said gently, "you're leaving tomorrow?" He nodded. "Duty calls." She smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Back to the world that never stops." He looked at her then, really looked. "Maya, I don't want this to end." "It doesn't have to," she said softly. "But you have to go. That's who you are." He took a step closer. "And if I don't want to be that man anymore?" Her eyes flickered with emotion. "Then you'll have to decide what you're willing to lose to find yourself." A pause. The city hummed around them. 1,000 lights, 1,000 unspoken choices. Sylvester reached out, brushed his thumb lightly along her cheek. "I'll come back," he said quietly. "Don't promise what you can't keep." "I mean it, Maya." Her eyes glistened under the streetlight. Then come back not because you miss me, but because you've chosen to. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Instead, he kissed her, slow, deliberate, filled with the ache of what words couldn't hold. When they finally pulled apart, she whispered, "Safe flight, Mr. Calloway." And just like that, she turned and disappeared inside. That night, back in his hotel room, Sylvester sat by the window overlooking the glowing city. He thought about her, the laughter, the honesty, the way she'd seen him beyond the name and numbers. For the first time, success didn't feel like enough. Something deeper called to him now, something he couldn't buy, build, or calculate. He didn't know what the future held. But as the first light of dawn broke over the city, one truth settled quietly in his chest. Maya Brooks had become more than a memory. She was a turning point, and this, whatever it was between them, had only just begun. Back in San Francisco, the skyline greeted Sylvester Calloway with its usual gleam of ambition. Towers of glass, air thick with productivity, and streets that hummed with urgency. It was everything he had built, everything he was known for. And yet, for the first time in years, it felt empty. Meetings resumed, deals closed, markets shifted, but he couldn't shake the silence between moments. Every pause in a conversation felt like the space where Maya should have been. He'd catch himself checking his phone between calls, hoping for a message, a photo, something small and grounding. And every night, when the city quieted down and his penthouse windows reflected his solitary figure, he'd think of her laugh, warm and unguarded, the kind that lived rent-free in his memory. Days became weeks. And still, she lingered. Across the miles, Maya Brooks had slipped back into her Chicago life. Color palettes, client meetings, design sketches spread across her desk. But something had shifted inside her, too. She had known fleeting romance before, the kind that fizzled faster than it sparked. But this was different. Sylvester's presence had left an echo, a steady hum beneath her thoughts. He wasn't just a chapter she could close. Every morning, she woke to a good morning text that somehow felt both sweet and insufficient. Every night, they exchanged soft, "How was your day?" messages that stretched into hours of laughter, teasing, and quiet moments that felt almost like touch. Still, beneath their words, the question always lingered. What are we becoming? One Friday evening, after another endless round of board meetings, Sylvester closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. His assistant, Clara, hovered by the doorway. "You've been different lately," she said lightly. "In a good way, I think. Happier, maybe, but distracted." He glanced up. "That obvious?" She smiled. "You used to talk about markets. Now you talk about colors and interior design." He chuckled, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guilty. Who is she?" He hesitated, then replied softly. "Someone who reminds me there's life outside of spreadsheets." Clara grinned. "Then for once, maybe you should go live it." Her words stayed with him long after she left the room. That night, while on a video call, Maya caught him staring. "What?" she asked, smirking. "Nothing," he said. "Just wondering how you make even pixelated light look beautiful." She rolled her eyes. "Smooth, Mr. Calloway." "I'm serious," he said, voice quieting. "I don't think I've missed anyone like this before." Her laughter faded into a soft exhale. "Don't start saying things you'll regret later." "Who says I'll regret it?" She stared at him through the screen, her features half lit by lamplight. "Because distance does strange things to people, Sylvester. Feelings get blurry." He shook his head. "Not these ones." There was a long pause, filled not with uncertainty, but with the weight of something real. Then, almost impulsively, he said, "Come to San Francisco." Her eyebrows shot up. "You're inviting me to visit?" He held her gaze. "I'm inviting you to stay for a while. A week. Maybe more." Maya leaned back, crossing her arms. "And what happens when the week ends? Then we figure out if this," he gestured between them, "is as real in person as it feels now." She looked away for a moment, chewing her lip. "You know I have projects. Clients. A life here." "I know," he said softly. "I'm not asking you to give it up. Just to make a little room for something new." For a heartbeat, the only sound was the faint hum of her apartment light. Then, with a small, hesitant smile, she said, "Let me think about it." For 3 days, he heard nothing. No calls. No texts. Just silence. Heavy and deliberate. On the 4th day, As Sylvester sat in his office, staring at the skyline he'd once worshipped, his phone buzzed out a message. From her. Flight booked. Thursday. Don't burn your city before I get there. That he stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across his face. Too late, he whispered to himself. You already set it on fire. Thursday came. San Francisco gleamed under a golden dusk when Maya Brooks stepped out of the terminal, elegant, composed, and just as radiant as he remembered Sylvester's driver met her at arrivals. But Sylvester himself insisted on waiting at the penthouse, pacing, restless, almost nervous, when the elevator finally opened. She stood there, simple jeans, white blouse, suitcase in hand, and smiled. Hey, she said softly. Hey, he breathed, almost forgetting how to. They didn't rush the moment. They just looked at each other, the kind of look that bridges weeks, miles, and words left unsaid. Then he stepped forward and pulled her into his arms. That it wasn't cinematic. It was real, warm, familiar, and for the first time since leaving Chicago, the world felt right again. That night, over dinner on his terrace overlooking the city lights, Maya teased, "You're really bad at long distance." He smiled. "That's why I made it shorter." She laughed, shaking her head. "You're impossible." He leaned in, his tone soft but certain. "No, just convinced." Convinced of what? That whatever this is, it's worth every risk. And as the stars blinked faintly above San Francisco, Sylvester Calloway realized he wasn't just chasing success anymore. He was finally chasing life. For the first few days, Maya Brooks let herself simply exist in San Francisco. No schedules, no clients, no early design consultations. Just the hum of the city, the rhythm of a new place. And Sylvester's quiet company, his penthouse, perched high above the bay, felt more like a museum than a home. Minimal, immaculate, and a little too perfect. Everything gleamed in muted shades of silver and glass, reflecting his need for control. When Maya first walked in, she laughed softly. "You live like someone's always watching." He arched a brow. "They usually are investors, analysts, the media." "Then maybe you need a place that feels like you, not your resume," she replied. Running her hand across the cold marble counter, he smiled. "You offering design advice already?" "Only if you can afford me," she teased. "Oh, I can," he said, stepping closer, voice dropping. "But you don't charge in dollars, do you?" Her eyes met his. "No," she whispered. "I charge in trust." It was playful, but beneath it, a truth lingered, one that neither dared to explore too deeply yet. Over the next week, they fell into an easy rhythm. Mornings began with coffee and quiet conversation on the terrace. Afternoons were spent exploring, bookstores tucked in narrow alleys, galleries hidden behind unmarked doors, even the occasional walk along the fog-draped Golden Gate. But between those tender moments, subtle cracks began to show. Sylvester's phone never truly stopped buzzing. Investors, partners, emergencies. And though he silenced it when she was near, Maya could see the tension behind his calm smile. One afternoon, as he ended yet another call, she sighed. "You don't really stop, do you?" He turned toward her, frowning slightly. "It's part of the job. You know that." "I do," she said. "But you can't live in two places at once. In your company and in the present." He rubbed his temples. "You sound like my therapist. Maybe you should have listened to them." Then, her tone was soft but pointed. He looked at her, realizing she wasn't angry. She was worried. Maya stepped closer, her hand brushing his arm. "I didn't come here to compete with your empire, Sylvester. I came to see if you can share your life without being consumed by it." Her words hit deeper than she knew. That evening, as they sat on the balcony watching the fog roll in from the bay, Sylvester finally spoke. "When I was 25, he began quietly. I lost a deal that nearly bankrupted me. From that day, I promised I'd never lose control again. Not over business. Not over myself." Maya listened, her gaze steady. "And now," he sighed, "now I meet a woman who makes me forget every rule I built to survive." She smiled faintly. "That's not losing control, Sylvester. That's learning to breathe." For a moment, the world around them disappeared. No noise, no chaos. Just the soft wind and the slow merging of two guarded hearts. But life, as it often does, had other plans. 3 days later, during a dinner with one of his company's biggest investors, Sylvester invited Maya to join him. wanting her to see the side of his world she'd only heard about. The restaurant was sleek, filled with men in tailored suits and women dressed in quiet wealth. Maya felt slightly out of place, but she carried herself with grace. Everything was fine until one of the investors, Marcus Trent, made a careless remark. "So this is the famous designer," Marcus said with a smirk. "You've done quite well, Maya, though I imagine it's hard keeping up with a man like Sylvester." Maya's smile didn't falter. "Hard? Not really. I walk at my own pace." The table chuckled politely, but Sylvester saw the flicker of tension in her eyes. Later that night, as they drove home, she finally spoke. "I don't belong in that world, Sylvester." He frowned. "What are you talking about? You were incredible tonight." You didn't hear the tone in his voice, or the looks. "They see me as the woman who's with you, not the woman who is herself." He reached for her hand. "They'll learn to respect you." She pulled away gently. "I don't need their respect, Sylvester. I just need yours, enough to know I won't get lost in your shadow." He fell silent. For the first time, Sylvester realized that love wasn't about building someone into your life. It was about making space for them to be whole inside it. That night, he couldn't sleep. He stood by the window, the city lights flickering below, his reflection staring back, powerful, successful, and utterly alone. If she ever chose to walk away, die in the darkness. One truth burned clear. If he wanted Maya to stay, he'd have to unlearn everything that had made him who he was. The next morning, he found her in the kitchen, brewing coffee. Before she could speak, he said quietly, "You were right." She looked up, surprised. "I've spent so long building walls around my life, I forgot how to let someone in. But I want to try with you." Her expression softened. "And what does try look like to you?" He smiled faintly. "Maybe starting by designing this place, together. Make it ours." Maya blinked, then laughed lightly. "You really know how to apologize, don't you?" "Only when I mean it." She stepped closer, sliding her arms around him. "Then let's see if you can handle color on your walls, Mr. Calloway." He grinned. "Only if you promise to stay long enough to paint them." "Deal?" she whispered, and as morning light spilled through the windows, filling the sterile space with warmth, Sylvester realized that for the first time, home wasn't a place, that it was a person. 3 weeks had passed since Maya Brooks arrived in San Francisco, and already, Sylvester Calloway's world looked and felt different. The once sterile penthouse was now a tapestry of textures and warmth. Sunlight danced on newly painted walls in soft amber tones. Plants flourished in corners that had once stood empty, and a hint of sandalwood lingered in the air. Maya had turned a space of silence into a living, breathing reflection of both of them. One morning, Sylvester walked into the living room to find her crouched over a canvas on the floor. A brush between her fingers and a streak of paint across her cheek. He leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "I didn't know interior design involved modern art." She looked up and smiled. "It doesn't. This one's for me." "For you?" She nodded. "Every time I move somewhere new, I paint something. It reminds me that I existed there, that I left something behind." He stepped closer, watching the swirl of colors, deep blues melting into golds, rough and elegant all at once. "What's this one called?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Becoming." The word lingered between them, soft but heavy with meaning. That afternoon, Sylvester had to attend another board meeting, one Maya insisted he go to without checking his phone every 5 minutes. When he returned that evening, the apartment smelled like roasted rosemary and wine. Maya had cooked, something she hadn't done since arriving. He grinned, hanging his jacket. "You cooked? For me?" "For us," she corrected, setting 2 plates on the table. "And before you ask, yes, I used your kitchen without a permit." He laughed, the sound lighter than it had been in years. Dinner was simple, but full of life. Laughter between bites. Stories from her childhood in Atlanta, confessions about his reckless college years. They talked until the candles burned low, until silence became something comfortable, not empty. Finally, Maya leaned back, looking at him thoughtfully. "You know, you've changed." He raised a brow. "Is that good or bad?" "Neither," she said softly. "It's real. You used to fill every quiet moment with noise, emails, numbers, work. Now you just exist." He smiled. "You make existing sound like an achievement." She met his gaze. "For some people it is." The next morning, change found its way into more than his home. During a meeting with his senior team, Sylvester announced something that left everyone stunned. "We're restructuring," he said, his tone calm but firm. "From this quarter onward, we'll prioritize people over output, flexible work schedules, creative breaks, community investment. No more burnout culture." One executive blinked. "Sir, with all due respect, that could affect profits." Sylvester looked around the table. "Maybe. But if we keep driving our people like machines, we'll lose the very minds that built this company. I'd rather grow slowly with meaning than quickly without purpose." A hush fell over the room. When the meeting ended, Clara, his assistant, approached him with a small smile. "This is new." He nodded. "It's overdue." That evening, he found Maya sketching by the window. "You changed your company," she said, not looking up. "News travels fast." "Clara texted me," she said, smiling faintly. "Said she's never seen you so human." He chuckled. "Was I a machine before?" "Not a machine," she said. "Just programmed." He stepped closer, sitting beside her. "Maybe you reprogrammed me." She smirked. "Dangerous job." He studied her face, then said softly, "I meant it when I told them it's time to slow down. You made me realize that life isn't measured by what I build, but by what I feel." She looked at him for a long moment, and in her eyes, he saw pride, affection, and a trace of fear. "Sylvester," she said carefully, "just don't lose yourself trying to be who I want. Be who you need." He reached for her hand. Maybe, for once, those are the same thing. Later that night, rain began to fall, soft, steady, wrapping the city in silver. They stood by the glass doors, watching droplets trace the skyline. "I never liked the rain before," he murmured. "Why?" "Because it slowed everything down." She smiled. "And now?" He turned to her, eyes warm. "Now, I think I've been moving too fast to notice how beautiful slowing down can be." For a long moment, they said nothing, just leaned into the quiet, into the rhythm of rain and heartbeat. But even as peace settled over them, the world beyond the glass kept turning. The more Sylvester changed, the more his investors whispered. To them, compassion looked like weakness. His shift in priorities worried those who only saw numbers. One evening, as he reviewed emails filled with veiled threats and doubts, he exhaled slowly. Change had a price, and he was beginning to feel the cost. Maya walked in, sensing the tension. "What's wrong?" He turned the screen toward her. "They're questioning my leadership." She read the messages, frowning. "Because you chose people over profit?" He nodded. "Apparently, that's revolutionary." She placed a hand over his. "Then let them doubt you. The ones who can't see beyond the numbers don't deserve the future you're trying to build." Her words settled deep, calm, clear, and steadying. And in that moment, Sylvester realized that love wasn't just soft. It was strong, strong enough to anchor him when the world began to shake. As the storm outside deepened, he looked at her and said quietly, "You know, I used to think love would distract me from success. But now I see it's the only thing giving it meaning." She smiled. "Then don't just say it. Live it." And as thunder rolled in the distance, Sylvester pulled her close, the city glowing behind them. Two souls finding peace not in perfection, but in becoming. By the time October rolled around, Sylvester Calloway had started to feel the weight of transformation pressing on all sides. The company's new policies, shorter work weeks, creative sabbaticals, mental health breaks, had made him a hero to employees and a villain to investors. For the first time in years, headlines questioned his judgment. Is Calloway losing his edge? One tech magazine sneered, "Visionary or reckless?" Another asked, "At first?" Sylvester ignored them. He'd built an empire on courage, not conformity. But when board members began to whisper about leadership adjustments, the noise grew impossible to tune out. One afternoon, he sat in his office staring at the city skyline, the sunlight sharp and cold. Maya arrived with lunch, her quiet way of keeping him human. "You didn't eat breakfast," she said, setting the bag on his desk. He looked up, weary but smiling. "You keeping tabs on me now?" "Someone has to," she said, perching on the edge of his desk. "You look like you haven't slept in a week." He leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "I've been in back-to-back meetings. The board wants answers I don't have." She frowned. "About what?" "About why I'm suddenly prioritizing people over profit. They think I've gone soft." Her eyes softened. "And what do you think?" He looked at her, tired, sincere. "I think they're right. I have gone soft. But maybe that's the best thing that's ever happened to me. Maya smiled sadly. Soft doesn't mean weak, Sylvester. It means alive. He reached across the desk, taking her hand. Then why does being alive feel like a battle? Because you're changing a world that profits from indifference, she said quietly. And the world always fights back. That evening, after she left, Sylvester sat in the dark long after the office emptied. The city lights below shimmered like a million tiny fires, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure which ones were burning for him or against him. His phone buzzed. A message from Marcus Trent, the same investor who'd mocked Maya weeks earlier. Emergency board session tomorrow. Attendance mandatory. We need to discuss leadership direction and public image concerns. Sylvester read it twice, the words slicing through his chest like ice. He knew what leadership direction meant. They were preparing to force him out of his own company. When he told Maya later that night, she listened without interrupting. Her calm unnerved him. Her silence, even more. Finally, she said, "You knew this might happen." "I did," he admitted. "But not this soon." She set her glass down. "Then maybe it's time to decide what matters most. Keeping control or keeping your truth." He frowned. "That sounds poetic until it costs you everything." She met his gaze evenly. "And if you lose yourself to keep everything, what's the point of having it?" He looked away, jaw tightening. "You make it sound easy." "It's not easy," she said softly. "It's honest." The next morning, the boardroom felt colder than usual. All sharp suits, colder stares, and polished deceit. Marcus Trent led the charge, his voice dripping with false diplomacy. "Sylvester," he began, "we appreciate your passion for innovation. But recent changes have concerned our investors. Profits have dipped, the press is questioning our stability, and frankly, Sylvester interrupted. Marcus smirked. "Frankly, some feel you've become distracted." The word hung in the air like an insult. "Distracted?" Sylvester repeated slowly. "You mean human." Murmurs rippled through the room. He stood, buttoning his jacket. "For years, I gave this company everything. Time, health, sleep, soul. And yes, I changed. Because I finally realized that growth isn't about expansion. It's about evolution. If that makes you uncomfortable, maybe it's time you evolve too." Marcus' smile didn't waver. "Inspiring speech, but numbers don't evolve with feelings. Neither do men like you." Sylvester shot back. The silence that followed was electric. When the meeting ended, he knew the war had begun. That night, Maya found him on the terrace, staring into the fog. "You stood your ground, didn't you?" she asked. He nodded. "And probably lost half my board." She joined him by the railing, the wind cool against their faces. "Then you'll rebuild with the half that still believes." He turned to her, a rare flicker of doubt in his eyes. "What if that half is just me?" "Then start with one," she said softly. "It's enough." The next few days blurred into long hours and restless nights. Emails poured in, some supportive, others venomous. Employees whispered, investors threatened, media speculated. But through it all, Maya stayed. She became his calm amid chaos, grounding him with the quiet strength he hadn't known he needed. One night, as they lay in the soft glow of the city lights, Sylvester murmured, "If I lose everything, will you still be here?" Maya turned toward him. "I'm not here for what you have, Sylvester. I'm here for who you are when you have nothing left to prove." Her words wrapped around him like a promise, not of forever, but of truth, and for the first time in weeks. He closed his eyes and slept without fear, but as dawn broke over San Francisco, the headlines told a different story. Callaway faces board revolt amidst declining profits. Leadership vote scheduled. Future of Callaway innovations in question. The storm had finally come. And this time, love alone might not be enough to hold the walls together. The morning of the board vote arrived gray and heavy, as if the sky itself understood what was at stake. From his penthouse window, Sylvester Callaway watched the city waking beneath a blanket of mist. He'd stood there for nearly an hour, coffee untouched, tie hanging loose around his neck. Behind him, Maya Brooks stirred quietly, pulling his suit jacket from the chair. "You don't have to go," she said softly. He turned to her. "If I don't, they'll take everything by default." She walked closer, holding his gaze. Maybe that's not a loss. Her calm steadied him. For days, she'd tried to prepare him for this moment. Not to win or lose, but to choose. "Do you think I'm doing the right thing?" he asked, Maya paused, her voice low but certain. I think doing what's right doesn't always mean doing what's safe. He looked at her for a long moment, at the quiet strength in her eyes, the steadiness that kept him from falling apart. Then he nodded once and slipped into his jacket. Then let's go find out. The boardroom was full before he arrived. 12 people. Powerful, polished, waiting to decide his fate with pens and paper. Marcus Trent, ever confident, greeted him with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Glad you could make it, Sylvester. We were beginning to wonder if you decided to step down voluntarily. Sylvester took his seat at the head of the table. If I ever step down, Marcus, it won't be because someone like you told me to. A few chuckles rippled quietly around the room. But beneath the tension, something else stirred. Respect. For years, even his critics had admired his composure. Now, they saw something new in him. Conviction. The discussion began, and as expected, it wasn't kind. Charts flashed on the screen, showing slight dips in quarterly profit margins. Words like decline, instability, and risk filled the air. Sylvester let them speak. Then, when the room fell silent, he stood. I built this company with one belief, he began, voice calm and clear. That innovation means more than products. It means progress. For years, we chased numbers and forgot people. And when we did, we lost what made this place extraordinary. He paused, letting his words sink in. Yes, profits dipped, but creativity soared. Employee retention is the highest it's been in 6 years. We're building not just a company, we're building culture. And if any of you can't see that, then maybe it's not the company that's lost its way. Maybe it's you. The silence that followed was long, heavy, electric. Marcus adjusted his cufflinks, expression unreadable, stirring speech. But let's not forget, this is business, not poetry. The numbers speak for themselves. Sylvester met his gaze steadily. Then maybe it's time the numbers learned a new language. The vote began. One by one, board members cast their decisions, small gestures that carried enormous weight. When the final tally appeared on the screen, the air seemed still. 6-6. A deadlock. The deciding vote belonged to the chairwoman, Elaine Grayson, the company's oldest and most respected voice. She leaned back, studying Sylvester for a long moment. Then she smiled faintly. I've watched you build this company from nothing, she said. And I've watched you almost destroy yourself to keep it alive. For the first time, I see a man who understands what legacy really means. Her pen touched the paper. I vote in favor of retaining Sylvester Callaway as CEO. The words landed like thunder. Marcus exhaled sharply, his composure cracking for the first time. You're making a mistake, Elaine. She turned to him calmly. No, I'm correcting one. When Sylvester stepped out of the boardroom, the air felt different, lighter, though not without weight. He'd won, yes, but the victory didn't feel like triumph. It felt like survival. Maya was waiting in the lobby, hands clasped, expression unreadable. The moment he saw her, the noise around him faded. Well? She asked quietly. He gave a tired smile. I kept the company. She studied his face. And did you keep yourself? He hesitated. Then, softly, I'm not sure yet. She walked to him, brushed her fingers along his sleeve. Then maybe now you'll have time to find out. That evening, the city was awash in gold as the sun dipped behind the bridge. They stood on the balcony again, the same place where so many decisions had begun. You did it, Maya said. He nodded slowly. We did. But it doesn't end here, does it? No, he admitted. This was the easy part. The hard part is becoming the man I promised to be. She smiled gently. Then I'll be here to remind you who that man is. He looked at her, emotion flickering behind his eyes. You know, I used to think success was about control. But today, I learned it's about faith. Faith in what? She asked softly. That he reached for her hand. In change. In people. In us. The city lights shimmered below, mirroring the quiet fire between them. For the first time, Sylvester didn't feel like a man defending a kingdom. He felt like one building a home, not out of ambition, but out of love. But even peace has its shadow. Because far across the city, Marcus Trent poured himself a drink, staring out his office window with cold fury. This isn't over, he muttered, and somewhere deep down, Sylvester Callaway would soon learn. Every victory carries a price. 3 weeks had passed since the boardroom war. To the public, everything looked serene, the market stabilized. The company's image polished by headlines like Callaway secures visionary future. But beneath the shine, cracks were forming. Sylvester Callaway walked the marble corridors of Callaway Dynamics one crisp morning, his reflection following him in every glass wall. On the surface, he seemed composed, but he could feel it, a shift in tone, in glances. In the air itself, the company he'd just saved now hummed with an uneasy quiet. When he entered the executive floor, his assistant handed him a tablet. "There's a leak," she whispered. "Anonymous emails, internal data. Nothing major yet." But he didn't let her finish. "Find the source," he said sharply. Then, softer, "and make sure no one panics." She nodded and hurried off. Meanwhile, in a corner office 3 floors below, Marcus Trent pored over spreadsheets and digital files, his expression calculated and cold. He'd lost the vote, but not the game. That he leaned back in his chair, staring at a photo of the company's headquarters on his wall. "You may have won the board, Sylvester," he murmured. "But let's see how you fare when your empire starts to crumble from the inside." He had allies, quiet, invisible ones. People who felt overlooked when Sylvester restructured departments. When innovation replaced familiarity, Marcus knew how to whisper into ambition and make it sound like justice. That evening, Sylvester met Maya at their favorite spot, a small jazz lounge tucked in the heart of the city. The saxophone crooned low and slow, mingling with the soft clink of glasses. She saw the tension on his face the moment he sat down. "You're not here tonight, are you?" she said quietly. He sighed. "I'm here. I'm just carrying too much of there with me." "The company?" He nodded. "There's something off. I can feel it, like the floor's shifting, but no one else hears the creak." Maya tilted her head. "Or maybe they do, but they're pretending not to." He looked at her, realizing she might be right. "Marcus hasn't said a word since the vote," Sylvester muttered. "That's what worries me most." A week later, an anonymous article appeared online. "Inside Callaway Dynamics, a culture of control?" It wasn't explosive, but it was damaging, filled with half-truths, suggesting Sylvester ruled with fear, that the board's decision was emotionally manipulated. Investors began to ask questions. Journalists began to call. Marcus, of course, played innocent. A press briefing. He stood beside Sylvester, smiling for the cameras. "The company's leadership is unified," he said, voice smooth as silk. "We remain committed to integrity." And when the lights dimmed and the microphones clicked off, he turned to Sylvester and said quietly, "Perception is everything, my friend. Be careful, you're losing it." Sylvester stared at him, understanding now that the game had shifted. Marcus wasn't fighting from across the table anymore. He was fighting underneath it. That night, Sylvester couldn't sleep. He sat on the edge of his bed, watching the skyline glow through the window. Maya woke, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders. "It's him, isn't it?" He nodded slowly. "Marcus won't stop until I'm undone." "Then what will you do?" He looked at her, not as the CEO, but as the man who'd spent years trying to prove something to the world. "This time," he said quietly, "I'm not fighting for the company. I'm fighting for what it stands for." She moved closer, touching his hand. "And for us." He met her gaze. "Always." But the next morning, when Sylvester arrived at work, his assistant was waiting at his door, pale and shaken. "Sir, you need to see this." She handed him a printed document, confidential, internal, and signed with his digital signature. "IT authorized a secret transfer of company funds to a shell account offshore." That Sylvester's eyes widened. "This isn't real," she whispered. "The media already has a copy." And in that moment, the walls of Callaway Dynamics, his creation, his pride, his refuge, began to tremble once again. Morning broke cold and merciless. By 8 a.m., every major business network carried the same headline: "Scandal at Callaway Dynamics. CEO implicated in offshore transfer." The footage looped endlessly, Sylvester's photo flashing beside words like fraud, embezzlement, and betrayal. From his office window, he could see reporters crowding the plaza below, cameras raised like weapons. His assistant, voice trembling, said, "Legal's already calling. The board has requested an emergency session." Sylvester rubbed his temples. Of course they have. He'd built this empire brick by brick, and now it was collapsing beneath him, piece by piece. The boardroom felt colder than ever. Elaine Grayson sat at the head of the table, grave and silent. Marcus Trent occupied his usual seat, calm as a man who'd already rehearsed this scene. Sylvester stood at the opposite end, documents spread before him. "The transfer isn't mine," he said firmly. "Someone forged my authorization." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "That's a serious accusation. Do you have proof?" "I'm working on it," Sylvester replied. Marcus's tone was silky smooth. "Then perhaps you should do that before the company's name burns in the press. Investors are pulling back. Stocks dropped 9% overnight. Because you fed this story," Sylvester shot back. Marcus smiled faintly. "Careful, Sylvester. You're talking like a man cornered. And cornered men tend to say dangerous things." Elaine's voice broke the tension. "Enough. This isn't a courtroom. Sylvester, we'll give you 72 hours to provide evidence of your innocence. Until then, the board will appoint an acting CEO for stability's sake." "Who?" Sylvester demanded. Marcus's lips curved slightly. "The board believes I'm the logical choice." The vote was swift. And just like that, Sylvester Calloway was suspended, not fired, but effectively silent. By afternoon, the world knew. Paparazzi swarmed his home. Reporters shouted his name across the street. "Mr. Calloway, did you divert company funds? Is Maya Brooks involved? Will you resign permanently?" He ignored them all, climbing into his car and driving until the skyline faded behind him. He ended up at the coast, where the wind tore fiercely through the cliffs and waves. For the first time in years, he felt small, not powerful, not influential, just human. When his phone rang, he almost didn't answer. It was Maya. "Sylvester, where are you?" "Nowhere," he said quietly. "Which feels fitting." "I know you didn't do it," she said, her voice trembling. "But you need to fight back. Not for them, for you." He closed his eyes, the wind roaring in his ears. "I don't even know where to start. Whoever did this, they knew everything. My codes, my signature, my habits. It's like they've been inside my head." She hesitated, then whispered, "Maybe they have." He opened his eyes. "What do you mean?" "I went through your company's communication logs," she said. "Someone's been mirroring your devices, emails, approvals, even your encrypted channels." He straightened, pulse quickening. "You can trace it?" "I already did." Her voice broke slightly. "Sylvester, it leads back to Marcus's office." That night, Sylvester returned to the city like a ghost moving through its ruins. The guards at headquarters hesitated but let him in. His clearance hadn't been revoked yet. The building was mostly dark, except for one light glowing through the frosted glass of Marcus Trent's office. Sylvester opened the door quietly. Marcus looked up from his desk, utterly unsurprised. "I was wondering when you'd show up." Sylvester stepped forward, fury held tightly beneath his calm exterior. "You forged my signature. You leaked the documents." "What?" Marcus chuckled. "Why? Because you forgot what this company was built on: control. You turned a machine into a dream, Sylvester. And dreams don't make profits." "You destroyed your own house to prove a point," Sylvester said. "No," Marcus replied, leaning forward. "I'm saving it from you." They stood in silence, the city's glow reflecting between them like firelight. Finally, Sylvester said quietly, "You'll regret this." Marcus smiled thinly. "No, you will, when you realize that truth isn't enough to win anymore." When Sylvester left that night, he wasn't defeated. He was focused. He drove straight to Maya's apartment, where she had already set up her laptop and files. "We can prove it," she said as he entered. "Marcus used internal proxies and deleted traces, but I've got timestamps that don't match your login history. If we can get the digital key logs from IT, we can show who accessed your credentials." Sylvester took a seat beside her, eyes burning with purpose. "For the first time," he said slowly, "I'm not fighting for my company. I'm fighting for the truth." She looked up at him, her voice soft but steady. "Then let's bring the truth to light." As dawn broke over the city, the first traces of evidence began to line up, fragile but real. And somewhere deep inside, Sylvester Calloway felt something stir again, the spark that had built an empire once before. But this time, it wasn't about power. It was about redemption. The night was thick with tension and code. Maya's apartment glowed dimly under the hum of computer screens, a fortress of data and determination. Lines of code flickered across her monitor as she typed furiously, eyes narrowed in concentration. Sylvester paced behind her, restless. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, tie abandoned hours ago. The fatigue in his face was sharp, but his mind was razor-focused. How much longer? He asked quietly. Almost there, Maya replied. Marcus thought he was smart. He used mirrored access tokens to copy your credentials, but he made one mistake. What mistake? She smiled faintly, eyes gleaming with resolve. He forgot that system logs record time zones. His entries were made from the East Coast servers. Yours always come from here, in San Francisco. Sylvester froze, realization dawning. So, we can prove the transactions weren't authorized locally. Exactly. I just need one more verification key from the internal server. He nodded. Then we bring it all down. Meanwhile, in his sleek corner office, Marcus Trent watched the skyline with a glass of bourbon in hand. News coverage had shifted from scandal to speculation. The company's shares were shaky, but Marcus didn't care. Control was all that mattered. He had silenced doubters, manipulated headlines, and painted Sylvester as a reckless visionary gone rogue. Soon, the board would make his title permanent. Then came a knock at the door. Come in, he said smoothly. Elaine Grayson stepped inside. Her expression was unreadable, her tone calm. The board meets tomorrow. I hope you're ready to answer some difficult questions. Marcus smirked. About what? She studied him carefully. About integrity. About the company's sudden leaks. About your role in all this. He set his glass down slowly. You're accusing me? I'm asking, Elaine replied. For now. When she left, his jaw tightened. He could feel the control slipping. And for a man like Marcus, that was worse than defeat. Back at Maya's apartment, the final key aligned on her screen. There, she said, triumphant. Proof of access from Marcus's credentials 3 minutes before your supposed authorization. He forged your signature using internal admin overrides. Sylvester stared at the screen. The truth was there, digital, undeniable, and explosive. Send it to Elaine, he said quietly. Maya hesitated. If we do that, it becomes public record. The fallout will be massive. Marcus won't just lose his job, he'll be ruined. He looked at her steadily. So was I. But you came back, she whispered. He won't. He paused. Then what are you suggesting? Maya took a deep breath. Use this, but don't release it yet. Make Marcus expose himself. Let him think he's still in control, and when he acts, the truth will corner him. Sylvester's expression softened. You're ruthless when you need to be. She smiled faintly. You taught me. The next morning, the board assembled in the grand conference room once again. Reporters buzzed outside, hungry for blood. Marcus stood tall, ready to finalize his claim to the throne. Before we begin, Elaine announced, Mr. Trent has requested to make a statement. Marcus nodded, walking to the head of the table. Thank you. It's been a turbulent time, but I've done everything I can to restore stability and trust to Callaway Dynamics. The doors opened. Every head turned. Sylvester Callaway stepped inside. Calm, composed, and flanked by security and a legal representative. Apologies for being late, he said evenly. I thought I'd let Mr. Trent finish rehearsing. Marcus's expression hardened. You're not supposed to be here. Sylvester approached the table, placing a file in front of Elaine. Evidence, he said simply. Proof that Marcus Trent fabricated financial transfers and used my credentials to frame me. The room fell silent. Elaine opened the file. Her eyes scanned the documents, time logs, digital signatures, server data. When she looked up, her expression was pure steel. Marcus, she said coldly. Is this true? Marcus's voice faltered for the first time. That's impossible. He's manipulating. Sylvester cut him off. You're the only one who could have accessed both internal and mirrored servers. You left your own timestamps in the metadata. Rookie mistake for a man who prides himself on precision. A ripple of whispers filled the room. Elaine stood slowly. Security. Escort Mr. Trent from the premises. Marcus's face drained of color. You can't do this. You already did, Sylvester said quietly. As he was let out, Marcus turned back once, eyes burning. This isn't over, Callaway. Sylvester didn't flinch. It never is. After the meeting, Elaine lingered behind. You've cleared your name. The board will reinstate you formally by tomorrow. Sylvester nodded, exhausted but relieved. She studied him. You could have destroyed him publicly. Why didn't you? He smiled faintly. Because sometimes, the best revenge is letting the truth speak louder than humiliation. That evening, Sylvester found Maya waiting outside the building. When he saw her, the weight of the past weeks seemed to lift. It's over, he said quietly. She smiled. No, Sylvester. It's beginning. He looked up at the skyline, at the city that had once mirrored his ambition, now reflecting something gentler. I lost everything to learn what really matters, he said. And what's that? He took her hand. What you build means nothing if you lose who you're building it for. She smiled, resting her head against his shoulder. Then let's rebuild, together. The city lights shimmered around them, not as symbols of power this time, but of peace. And for the first time in years, Sylvester Calloway didn't feel like a man haunted by ambition. He felt like a man finally free. 6 months later, the wind over Carmel by the sea carried the scent of salt and renewal. The ocean stretched wide and blue, rolling gently against the cliffs like it was breathing in rhythm with the earth. A small beach house sat at the edge of the coast, simple, warm, and alive with laughter. Sylvester Calloway stood on the porch, barefoot, holding a mug of coffee as he watched the horizon. His phone, once a constant source of urgency, now lay silent on the table inside. The world had changed around him, but more importantly, he had changed within it, behind him. Maya Brooks stepped out, wrapping her arms around him. You've been staring at that horizon for 10 minutes, she teased softly. Trying to calculate how far you've come? He smiled, just thinking how strange it feels to finally stop running. She leaned against him. You're not the man I met a year ago. He chuckled. That man thought peace was for people who had nothing to lose. And now? She asked. He turned slightly, meeting her gaze. Now I know peace is what you fight hardest to keep. The world hadn't forgotten about Sylvester Calloway. The scandal had faded into memory. The truth had cleared his name. And Calloway Dynamics had entered its most transparent, creative era yet. But Sylvester no longer sat at the head of its boardroom. He had stepped down voluntarily, handing leadership to a younger team he'd mentored himself. I don't need to own everything I build, he told the press. Sometimes the best thing you can do for your legacy is let it breathe without you. The statement had gone viral, quoted across magazines and business panels. But to him, it wasn't strategy. It was liberation. Later that afternoon, he and Maya walked along the shore. The sky was painted in hues of gold and rose, the sun dipping lazily toward the horizon. You ever miss it? She asked. The chaos. He said with a grin. Sometimes. But then I remember the noise, the pressure, the loneliness. She looked at him, her expression tender. You built an empire, Sylvester. You could have had anyone, anything. But you walked away. He took her hand, fingers brushing hers gently. Because what's the point of building towers if you can't see the sky? She smiled, shaking her head. You're getting poetic in your old age. He laughed. Old age? I'm just learning how to live. That evening, they sat by a small bonfire behind the house. The flames danced against the night breeze, soft light flickering across their faces. Maya was sketching in her notebook, designs for a new project she was starting, a foundation for young innovators. You really think people can start over? She asked, glancing up. Sylvester nodded, gaze fixed on the stars. I don't just think it. I'm living proof. He paused, then added, we spend so much time chasing what we think defines us, titles, success, validation. But what defines us is what survives when all that's gone. Maya closed her notebook and leaned against him. And what survived for you? He smiled softly. You, hope, and the understanding that redemption isn't about forgiveness from others. It's about forgiving yourself. The waves rolled against the shore in quiet applause. As the fire dimmed and the night deepened, Sylvester looked up one last time. The stars shimmered faintly, endless and calm. That he thought about the boy who had once dreamed of conquering the world, and the man who finally learned to belong in it. For years, he had chased perfection. Now, he had found peace, not in boardrooms or headlines, but in laughter, in love, in the quiet rhythm of the sea. That he reached for Maya's hand and whispered, for the first time, I don't want more. I just want this. She smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Then you finally won, Sylvester. The fire crackled softly, and the night wrapped around them like a promise, gentle, eternal, complete. And as the tide crept closer to the shore, Sylvester Calloway knew that the story of his life was no longer about ambition or defeat. That it was about becoming whole again. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the story, please like, share, and subscribe to Boundless Echoes for more interesting stories. Your support has kept us going, and we deeply appreciate it. Comment where you are watching from, so we can give you a special shout out. See you in the next video.